Where do all those people come from, those millions that he killed? Remember, Marx said industrialized nations. Okay? You had to eliminate private property. Okay? Okay. So when the dictatorship of the proletariat came into place under Lenin, the goal was to eliminate private property. Think Marx. The problem was the kulaks, the peasants in the outreaching rural areas, wouldn't give up their land. They'd held it by family for generations. So the kulaks became a problem, an impediment to eliminating private property. And when you read the reading that I gave you, he talks about how Lenin's first policy was to leave the kulaks in place because the kulaks were the part of the Soviet economy that produced all the food. And so Lenin saw it as beneficial to the state to continue to let them hold their property privately as long as they were producing for the state, and they would take the food, and that was what was collectivized. Stalin, in the reading that you had for today, changes that policy and says now is the time that we can start addressing the problem of the peasant problem, the kulak problem, through a solution called dekulakization. And it's euphemistic for exactly what you think he means, which is the eliminating of the kulaks as a class. Okay? One thing I want you to notice that we really lose sight of, because in our Christian worldview context, we value the individual. Remember, Marx viewed people as a member of a class. Stalin viewed the kulaks as a member of a class and as the class that was causing problems. And this is what he writes. To launch an offensive against the kulaks means we must smash the kulaks. This was millions of uneducated peasants. We must smash the kulaks and eliminate them as a class. Why? Because they own property and they refuse to give it up. Why? Because they belong to churches and they refuse to renounce God. Okay? Consequently, he goes, you have problems with this? Maybe somebody around him was raising like, we can't kill a whole class, Lenin didn't. He said, consequently, it is now ridiculous and foolish to discourse at length on dekulakization. There's nothing to talk about, he says. When the head is off, one does not mourn for the hair. So let that sink in for a minute. So he eliminated, they don't even have a full number of how many kulaks, because record keeping being what it was at the turn of the 19th, 20th century, they didn't even know how many kulaks there were. They weren't doing census counts under the Tsar, but it's estimated 10, 20, 30 million as a class smashed, destroyed. Dekulakization. You'll see similar euphemisms under Mao, similar euphemisms under Hitler, the final solution. Okay. So you take something that's blatantly evil and put something over it that seems kind of palatable or scientific or efficient. Dekulakization. It's kind of like delousing, or you get rid of the problem. Okay. All right. Number 5. So one place where millions of deaths came from was the peasant policy, the dekulakization. Okay. And sometimes we look at Hitler and go, well, he eliminated the Jews. That was racially based. That was genocide, right? Eliminating the kulaks as a class was based on their race. It was based on their nationality. So it's genocide, okay? And so we just lose sight of that, whether it's not taught well. Okay. And he also introduced famine in the Ukraine. Now, if you know anything about the Ukraine, it's the breadbasket of Eastern Europe, or it was. Okay. And again, this idea of collectivizing the rural population and the peasant farms led to famine. But it was coupled with drought, but it was just this confluence of events where people 2.4 million to 12 million, question mark, maybe higher, the census records are horrible in these rural areas, were killed by starvation. Killed by starvation. Okay? And there's a word for it called the Holodomor. Holodomor. Okay? Robert Conquest, in one of his books, and he's now deceased, but he was one of the leading scholars unpacking the Stalin regime, the Soviet regime, and looking at numbers in terms of the Great Terror, the Great Purge, kulakization, and he looked closely at this and puts the number anywhere from 12 million and higher, and this is what he says, okay? He says it was a deliberate act of mass murder. Because, again, think of point number 4, the peasants were a problem, the kulaks were a problem. They couldn't wrest the land away from them. The goal of Marxism to go through the revolutionary sequence is to eliminate private property. That's the first thing they have to do. The kulaks are saying no. We'll either smash them as a class or we'll starve them as a class. Okay? It's just as horrific as you think. Okay? And I'm just going, Lord, help me just be sensitive. This is horrible stuff. This is horrible stuff. And it was committed as part of official policy of the Soviet Union under Stalin's leadership. Okay? So point number 5, famine in the Ukraine. I'm not sure they've ever bounced back since then.